So you know when you meet up with a friend, especially over New Year, and you've got some actual time to catch up, but all they do is recommend you books and you can't get a word in edgeways? Yeah, it's going to be a walk like that. The sun is actually out for the first time in a very long time, and it's actually looking kind of nice. So I thought we'd do a little winter walk, and I can tell you the best books that I read this year. So the first one is actually one of the last books I read this year. It was just simply absolutely everywhere for some reason, and I'm not usually somebody who buys into the zeitgeist. I usually want to be like, oh, I'm not like other readers, I don't want to read what's in the bestseller list. But I've actually interviewed Samantha Harvey before and I thought she was brilliant. So when I saw that this book, this quite literary, niche, very short book was in the charts, I was like, what's in this? And it turns out crack is what is in it. It's one of the best books I've ever read, probably, not just this year. It's about 6 astronauts who are suspended above Earth, and about their thoughts of what Earth is now that they're not on it, like the fact that you can actually look at Earth from the outside. So if you're in need of a different perspective, if you feel like you've been overthinking this year and you've just been stuck in your own head, this is the perfect short little read. It doesn't really have a plot, and for some reason it's still really gripping. I read it in about 48 hours, and I just don't know how a human wrote this. Do you know, you read a book and you're like, how is this person human? It's just so good and perfect and so clever, and I just highlighted everything in it. Everything in this book is highlighted. There's less highlighted than isn't highlighted. I'm such a big fan. I'm gonna have to read everything else that Samantha Harvey has ever written, I'm afraid. No, I know you want to tell me how your New Year's Eve was, but first I need to tell you about this book. Brotherless Night, my God. I always discover some of my best books of the year when I read the Women's Prize list, and this year was no different. This book is about the Sri Lankan Civil War. One of my best friend's families growing up was from Sri Lanka, so I knew a little bit about Tamil stuff and all of that, but I didn't know it in this depth. This is absolutely incredible. It's a look at one girl's life over the course of her being involved in the Sri Lankan Civil War, and it's just amazing. She wants to study to become a doctor, and all of the people that she grows up with start to join radical organisations and get swept up in the war. And before she knows it, the war is in her town and her brothers are getting swept up in it as well. It is very upsetting, but it's also really, really gripping. Again, it's one of those ones that I think these books make this list when I'm like, I can't believe just one person pulled this off. It's so well orchestrated. The way all the timings happen are amazing. And what I think is really hard to achieve with a book like this is getting you to care very fast about very specific people and buildings and places. And when they fall or something happens to them, you feel devastated, like you have a nostalgia about it, like you've always known these people and you can't believe that something's happened to them. It's just got a huge amount of heart in it, and it's a very nuanced look at what it's like to really know what the people that are pushed to extremes and the backstory of them, and not just what hits the headlines. So yeah, really, really great. Read it. Those of you who have been around for a while will know I love Claire Fuller's writing, and I was trying to read more of her books. I really want to have read the whole catalogue of some authors' books, something that I'm quite bad at historically. So I picked up Our Endless Numbered Days, and it devastated me. It was so good. And I think it's one of those books that after you finish it, you're like, that was good. And then the further you are away from it and the longer it's been since you've read it, you're like, hot damn, that was really fucking good. It kind of affects you in that long-term way, which I think, again, makes a great book and makes it deserve to be on this list. This is about a girl called Peggy who's 8 years old when her dad takes her away to a remote European cabin in the woods and tells her that the rest of the world as we know it has ended. All of her family are gone, civilization has collapsed, and they're the only 2 people who are alive on Earth. It's about her journey growing up with her very erratic, kind of scary dad, to be honest, in these woods and learning all the survival techniques. So it's got a kind of cottagecore vibe to it, but much darker. So it is about living remotely and living off the land, but it's also about, as you get older, realizing that your parents might not be as trustworthy as you thought they were, and trying to find your own autonomy outside of a toxic parent relationship. It's really chilling but really, really beautiful, and I'm so glad I read it, and I can't wait to read everything that Claire Fuller's ever written, which will be soon. Actually, I'm getting through them. Half of a Yellow Sun is one that was actually personally recommended to me by Kate Moss, who was the founder of the Women's Prize. I did a video very recently on my channel where she recommended me loads of books, and this is one of them. So I won't go on about this one too much because I've literally just done a video talking about it. But it's 1960s Nigeria. Again, it is about a civil war that happens in Nigeria and like the real people behind it. And I thought it was incredibly executed. Some real like proper complicated lessons at the end of the book. Like I really think she thought very hard about how to end it in a way that was honest, not too optimistic, but still not too damning and like all humans are evil, kind of like, you know. Anyway, I thought it was incredible. I need to read more of her work. Obviously, she's a very like famous writer that I just have never dipped into myself. So yeah, really, really glad I read this one this year. So thank you, Kate Moss. So I don't know if this is like a reading hot take, but I do not love books where it's like famous book, but subversion from a different character's perspective. I'm a bit like, oh, do we have, must we? But I do love a book that's set after a famous book has finished. And this is one of them that I ended up really, really liking. This is a proof of Charlotte by Helen Moffat. You might recognize this because I got it during the pandemic when I was trying to give shout outs to lots of books that weren't getting any publicity or attention because the pandemic had just hit. And I finally got around to reading this one this year and I absolutely bloody loved it. This is Pride and Prejudice, but the main character is Charlotte, you know, like Elizabeth Bennet's friend who's like, I'm 27 years old. It's from her perspective after Pride and Prejudice finishes, quite a long way after Pride and Prejudice finishes. She's got kids at this point, and it's about her relationship not only with Elizabeth Bennet, who, by the way, is not having an ideal relationship with Darcy, and like living in a very like empty house and having trouble conceiving and very upset about that. And Charlotte goes through her own really hard problems and kind of actually gets closer to Mr. Collins. Now this, I couldn't believe a book would make me think that Mr. Collins is actually kind of one of the best husbands, but she made me think that, and I just thought it was an incredibly nuanced look at what it means to like what marriage really meant in those times, and how people can grow to love each other over time, and not only idolizing the most charismatic and outgoing and clever heroine, but also the most pragmatic heroine, which is what Charlotte is. And there's also some very believable details that Helen Moffat adds to what we know of Pride and Prejudice, and a few things that obviously, according to her, supposedly happened behind the scenes that Elizabeth Bennet didn't know about in Pride and Prejudice that makes Charlotte's choices make so much more sense. So anyway, now Charlotte is my favourite character in Pride and Prejudice, and I thought this was incredibly executed. There is also a bit of a romance in it. It can get a little bit steamy at times, but I just think it's just really beautifully written and a really realistic, uplifting look at being a woman during those times. And I also felt like all the dialogue was very believably Regency without the whole thing being written like Jane Austen. So again, if you struggle to actually read the primary text of Jane Austen, but you still want to get that feeling of Regency, hit it up. Locals to the channel will be absolutely sick of me talking about this book, so I'll keep it brief. Doppelganger by Naomi Klein changed my life. Okay, that's it. That's the review. No, for those of you who don't know, Naomi Klein wrote this book called Doppelganger, which was inspired by the fact that she kept getting confused with Naomi Wolf, who is also, or was, a very prominent like intellectual feminist who was also Jewish and talked about some of the same topics that Naomi Klein did. However, as Naomi Wolf started swinging right wing after a public shaming, it became even more annoying to be completely confused with her all the time, and she started, instead of getting angry about it, she started delving into what made Naomi Wolf turn right wing and started immersing herself in that kind of content to try and work it out. And as a byproduct started really looking at this idea of doppelgangers in like our collective consciousness, and what is like your shadow self or your twin self or your opposite, the person that you aren't that haunts you. And it's actually a really philosophical book about what we get wrong about ourselves and what we get right, and how we can start to understand why people become right wing through stuff like public shamings, and how we should avoid that on the left, and the behaviours that we can change on the left to stop people from running that way. She also talks in a really nuanced, incredible way about growing up Jewish and learning about the Holocaust and how that relates to Palestine, and how she thinks that her upbringing as like a Jewish person has affected her like relationship to Palestine, and it's really clever. You got to read it. And there's also a really great chapter on her child being autistic and the doppelganger child that lives inside some parents' heads of like the child that wasn't autistic. What would my life have been like, and how damaging that can be for the children. It touches on so many things, and I just think you just gotta read it. I also, like, literally the other day listened to an interview with Naomi Klein about her process of writing this book, and it's really interesting, and it sounds like she's actually kind of changed her authorial voice to write this and tried to write a lot more like how she talks. So if you've tried Naomi Klein before and you felt like it was too academic or a little bit too heavy, from what I can see, I haven't read any other Naomi Klein books, from what I can see, this is a little bit different from her other stuff, so definitely worth a try. Why haven't you read it yet? I'm waiting. It's getting dark, but I'm not going to shut up, so hopefully we can get through these books before the sun sets. This is I Love You, I Love You, I Love You by Laura Dockrell. Laura Dockrell is historically one of my favourite authors, and she references a story that happened in her life about how she got together with her husband in some of her other works, but she's never talked about it in depth, and this is kind of like her fictionalised, slightly changed account of her like 10-year romance with her husband before they got together, and it's absolutely phenomenally beautiful. I really actually recommend this in audio. I own both because I'm a super fan. Okay, the audiobook is really brilliant. Like, Laura Dockrell is also a poet, and the way she reads is an art form in itself, so definitely get the audiobook if you can, but they're both brilliant. And it's, if you want a kind of mushy, nuanced love story about awkward people who are never like saying the right thing to each other at the right time, and like that really satisfying slow burn, and like feeling those, especially it's very cathartic if you've just been through a breakup or something as well, because there's so much like angst in it, but like very poetic, nuanced angst. And yeah, I loved it. I don't know what else to say. Why aren't more books written in this kind of way? I think she's got a really like unique writing voice anyway, but this is a particularly, I think, unique take on the slow burn love story, and yeah, just thought it was brilliant. The Wedding People. I found this book because when I was at the book bar filming with Kate Moss, I was packing up all my stuff and I overheard one of the booksellers recommend this book to somebody else, and the hook for it was so enticing that I at the end went up to the bookseller and I was like, I'm really sorry, but about 10 minutes ago you're talking to this woman in a green dress and you were recommending a book and I didn't get the name of it, can you just tell me what that is? And she gave me the whole pitch again, very kindly of her, and I was just like, give it to me, take my money. So this is The Wedding People. It is about a woman who is going through a really hard time in her life and decides that she wants to end her life in this really beautiful hotel that she's looked up online while she was in lockdown and COVID. She just like looked at this hotel all the time, and it was like her happy place, her imaginary happy place. So she books herself a room in this hotel. She's like, okay, I'm going to end my life in this hotel. That's the plan. She gets to the hotel. Everybody else in the whole freaking hotel is going to a wedding. Like this whole hotel has been booked up for this one woman's wedding. And essentially she's like, well, this is going to be a little bit more awkward than I first thought. She gets into a lift with the bride, and through a really weird conversation accidentally admits to the bride that is what she is planning to do. That's why she is here. The bride is just like, don't you freaking dare ruin my wedding. The bride is very much a Glinda, and it becomes this weird interplay between this kind of bratty but like has a heart kind of bride and this woman who is ready to end it all, about like the bride being like, you just need to stay alive one more day because I don't want you to ruin this part of my wedding. You just need to stay alive one more day because I don't want you to ruin this part of the wedding. Why don't you come to my bridal shower because I need you for this task. So you can't die today because I need you for this. And it becomes this like really epic thing where this woman gets injected into this completely other situation and world. Loads of really dramatic stuff happens with like all the attendees that attend the wedding, which is why it's called The Wedding People, and it's about how she decides not to die. Essentially, like that's the whole book. It's really beautiful. I wish there were more books about people who thought like were in a place like this and got out of it through the help of strangers, because it's weird that there aren't more books about that. I think that might be a really good thing to have in the world. But this is really gripping. It's written in an incredibly readable way. Like I read it in about 2 days. It was really fast. but it also has like a lot of those highlightable, beautiful passages in it, which is really hard to find. It's hard to find a page turner that also has really great, like, molecular, beautifully structured sentences. And I just thought it was just a massive winner. Like, I want everybody to read this. I'm going to give it to everybody for Christmases and birthdays, and I love it. If you love Vary McFarlane, or if you love Emily Henry, I think that you'll love it. But I think also if you have a bit more of like a literary lilt and you're not so into those kinds of books, I still think you'll love it. I think that it's just brilliant and more people should be talking about it. So thank you so much for that, bookseller. We need physical booksellers in this world, because I would have completely missed this book without that. So the sun set, so we had to come to the pub. What a shame. The two last books I wanted to talk to you about. One is Jane Austen at Home by Lucy Wolseley. This is an audiobook I listened to, and I listened to it because I was going to the Jane Austen Festival and I wanted to see which parts of it were about Bath. It actually turned out to be one of the best biographies I've ever read, and most of the most interesting bits weren't about Bath, but that's fine. It was a book that came to me at the right time. But it's about like the whole history of Jane Austen's life, told by somebody who is so infectiously keen about Jane Austen facts that you will catch it. Even if you don't like Jane Austen, it is genuinely contagious. And I learned some really interesting things about Jane Austen that even as a lifelong fan of her, I didn't know, especially about her brother. There's a whole thing there, like how she got published. There was just so much interesting stuff. And the main like thesis of the book is about the fact that it's not just like Jane Austen's home life was her life. That was like what women's lives were. But there's so many expansive experiences within the home that it's genuinely fascinating. And also the fact that she says the main thread of all of Jane Austen's books isn't love or the fact that they end up with the right person, like marrying the right person in the end, but that all of her heroines are displaced. They all experience like home as a very stressful experience that isn't within their control. And I think that is a really interesting way to read the novels, and I bloody loved it. I thought it was funny, like very fast-paced for a biography about the Regency times, and just like a masterpiece. Absolutely loved it. And then finally, have to talk about Sally Rooney's Intermezzo. I am a very touch-and-go Sally Rooney fan. I worship normal people, and I hated Conversations with Friends, and I didn't really like Beautiful World, Where Are You? So I was like, this book is going to decide whether I am actually a Sally Rooney fan or not, and it did, and I am. This is probably formally, I would say, her best work to date, even though in my heart, like, my favourite is still Normal People. I think she's just getting better and better as a writer. And I just thought this book is really incredible because it centres a very complicated relationship between two brothers who are complete opposites, and them in grief, basically, and how they respond to grief and how it breaks down their relationship very slowly over time, and then they start to rebuild it in a really nuanced, clever way. And it also deals with like age gap relationships and like how gender impacts that, and it deals with toxic masculinity and how people break out of it. And I just thought there's some beautiful lines in it. I thought it was really clever, and I was prepared to hate it, and I just couldn't. I think it's one of the best books I've read this year, and I can't wait to see what she writes next, because politically me and Sally Rooney are aligned, and I would love it if I had more authors that wrote beautifully who also politically aligned with how I feel, because sometimes I want to read more about that, and I feel like it's absent in so many books, and I would like some Marxism with my romance and my family dramas, please. So yeah, absolutely loved it. What a book. Right, that's quite enough chatting about books. Let me know below the best books that you read in 2024, because I'm looking for some recommendations in 2025. I plan to visit a hell of a lot of bookshops, especially because I'm doing some events at them, links below, and I plan to spend some good money and feed the economy in the bookshop. So let me know below what I should buy. Me and cameraman Craig are gonna go home now, but thank you so much for watching, and thank you to the Gumption Club for making this video possible. And if you want to buy my book, Half-Assed Human, you can do so in the links below, because it's out now. It's out! What the fuck? Anyway, Frogslug out.